This is going to be a tutorial on how to recreate some of the 3D assets from the Robinhood Gold website. So if you go to the website, you can see there's some cards on here. I already have a tutorial about how to do that specific thing that you can look at. What I'm going to be recreating is this little illustration here, this little family thing. It's very similar to this one with the keys, but these shapes are a little bit simpler, so we're going to go with that one. So let's save that file to your computer for reference, and let's figure out what's actually going on in this file. So in here, we have a bunch of things going on, but we'll break it down one by one. So talking about lighting, first of all, we'll try to inspect where the lights are in this scene. To my eyes, I see one light here, I see a second light here, and a third and final light here. So light number one is going to be over here. Number two is over here. And then there's this third one, which is the most important one, that's a spotlight up here that's projecting like a cone down over all of these. And that's where this ring is coming from. So that's an important part of the composition. Obviously, you have the shapes. You have these long cast shadows of it. So if we were going to draw the scene, like if this is the side view of it, and this is our camera. Let me draw a camera real quick. I got to make sure this camera looks good. Perfect. I think the camera is a little bit above it. Maybe not as dramatic as this drawing. It might be lower, more like dead on. So if I was going to move these guys up a little bit, maybe it's something more like this. And there's those long shadows. So we're going to actually need quite a bit of distance between these, the camera and the subject here. So that's the breakdown of what I'm seeing here. So let's jump into Blender and try to recreate it and see if we're right. So I'm just going to get rid of all that stuff. I'm going to open up Blender. I'm on Blender 4.0. I changed my starter file a little bit, so I don't have anything in it. But if you press A, it'll select everything in the scene, and then you press X and delete, and you'll end up where I am. But we want to be able to see what we're working on. So I'm going to pull from a corner to open up a new window here. And up at the top left, I'm going to pick Image Editor. And this is just to open up our reference image. So let's open that up real quick. This is what we'll be working from. And, you can create as many of those as you want and then just close them the exact same way. So let's get started by drawing some of these shapes. So these are pretty simple primitives. And I figure we'll just do these first three and ignore the cat for now because those ears would be a little bit more complicated modeling than I want to get into right now. So if we start with the one in the middle, we can see it's kind of an interesting shape. I would call this a cylinder, but this top half is making me want to call it more of a sphere, and I'll show you why. So if I hit Shift A and I add a UV sphere, and we get this, I'm going to go to the side profile here and go to wireframe mode so I can really see what's going on. In order to recreate this shape, I'm going to actually delete the bottom half of the sphere. So I selected them all, and then I hit X and delete the vertices. So now I have a half sphere, and I'm going to take this bottom part and extrude it down along the Z axis. So I pressed E and then Z, and we get this kind of shape, right? And then we'll be able to cap it off by keeping that selection, and we can press F on the keyboard, and that'll fill in this face right here. So now we have a complete shape. But there is a little bit of a divide between these two, so I think I'm going to split these pieces again, actually. So what I'm going to do is hit Command R and make a loop cut up towards the top here, and that in here, I'm going to actually separate these pieces. So I'm going to switch over to Edge Select mode. I'm going to select all these, and I'm going to delete the edges. So now we have kind of like two pieces, right? So I'm going to select these, press F to cap it off, select this, press F to cap it off. And now, hypothetically, we should have what looks like two separate pieces. There might be like slightly more clever ways to make this geometry a little bit better, but this seems okay to me. So I'm going to pick all this stuff up and move it close to it so it feels like one continuous shape. I'm going to go ahead and save the file just in case something catastrophic happens. So now we've got that. We'll do the beveling to it later. You can notice if you look close, like all these edges are nice and smooth. So that's just a bevel, and it'll give us better shadows and stuff. So we'll wait a second before we do that. So we have that shape. Let's go ahead and do another sphere and do the same thing, but make the other side smaller. So I think this one's a little bit smaller. Let's bring it down. Go to wireframe mode, tab into edit mode, select, delete this, do the same thing. We need to create this face again. We can make sure that happened. So there's our face. And you know what? Let's make another sphere. You know, when I was looking at that shape originally, I wasn't thinking, you know, just all spheres, but here we are. So like so, and that's our first shape done. And you could make these a little bit more accurate by coming in and doing some more loop cuts and making the geometry a little bit more bulbous, right? But I don't want to get too caught up in doing all the modeling here. So we're going to keep it pretty simple. That's the wrong shape. I want to start working on the guy on the left. So I'm going to introduce a cylinder, and I'm going to move it along the y-axis to get it out of the way, move it down just so these are roughly aligned, and we can see it tapers a little bit. So we'll do some of that tapering. We're not going to do all of it here. So there's a taper. If you wanted to, you could do a loop cut here and then, you know, scale that out. Now you have a slightly better version of that shape, but that's as complicated as we're going to get with that. Another cylinder. Let's move it over here, shrink it down, move it up. We're going to try to make the proportions right. That looks too small right now, so I press 7 on my keyboard to snap to the top. I'm going to, you know, kind of center this thing on top of this. That looks close enough to me. And let's give them a head. We can just copy this head here. Move it here, move it down, and it looks right to me. So that's pretty close. We'll make his head a little bit bigger. Or maybe we'll make this smaller. Yeah, this is where you can get artistic with it and kind of do whatever you want. Now let's make the tiny guy. He's just a head, and then a kind of a curved cylinder. So we could do the exact same thing we did here. I think that's what we'll do, actually. So let me just bring him kind of where I want him. I'm going to duplicate this sphere again, bring it down. And I'm going to do the same technique we've been doing where I cut the sphere in half and delete that stuff. And then I'll pick these up and extrude them down with E. Z. How tall is this guy? Probably about yay tall. Then I'm going to press F to fill in that face. And let's take a look. And you can kind of get a feeling for how you could adjust this to make this a little bit, you know, more accurate to the illustration we're copying here. Let's see. I might take this whole guy and shrink him down a little bit. He seems a little big. Okay. That looks pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and do our bevels that we were talking about. So there's shortcuts you can use. I use this thing called Hard Ops to do bevels kind of quickly, but since this is a tutorial, we'll just do basic Blender stuff. So if I come in here and I select all of this and do Command B, oops, I have too much selected there. I just want to select the top edge. Let's do the bottom edge too. I hit Command B, and now we're beveling, and you can scroll on your mouse to adjust how many steps that bevel has. So we'll do a couple of steps. Yeah, just like a very slight bevel, nothing too dramatic. And we're going to do that on all of them. You know, I don't know if there's a good way to do it, you know, across the board to bunch of them at once. And something I'm noticing is that this is actually clipping through our object here. So I'm going to move it up. And you can kind of see the difference already. And then you can select them, right click, shade smooth. And now we're getting smoother. Let's see here. Let's do all these. Same stuff. So we'll do this little bevel. And we'll do this as a bevel. Again, Nothing too dramatic. We're trying to just catch some shadows. Nothing too crazy. Okay, that looks good. And this guy, we'll just bevel him at the bottom. And even in their example here, it looks like it's not totally even. Like this bevel looks a little bit more dramatic than these. Or maybe he's a little higher above the plane, which we'll do now. So let's select everything and make sure we're right-click shade smooth, just so it looks like that. And we'll enter in a plane. So this will be the floor that's catching all the reflections. We'll scale it up. Want to make sure it's pretty close to the bottom of these guys. We don't want it to clip through them. We just want him to be resting right on top of that. So we can see this guy's clipping through it a little bit. So we'll move him up just a hair on the Z-axis. Okay, cool. So those are our characters. Now let's line them up, kind of how they're lined up over here on our reference. So if I select all of these, I'm grabbing them and moving them here and here. I'm just pressing G and then the axis that I want to lock it to. This guy's a little bit in front of his mom. This guy's got a big head. I can't even see the rest of him. And let's move him over here. Something like so. Looks pretty close to what's going on here. Now let's pull in the camera and kind of try to nail our perspective. So we'll Shift A to add, and then we'll add the camera. And the camera is somewhere back here. Here it is. I'm going to press G and then X to move it back here. And I'm going to press G and Z to get it kind of up. And the way I like to adjust the camera is by going into the camera here, making sure I have it selected, and then manually adjusting all of these guys here. So you can change the rotation on blah, blah, blah. So this is going to remain at 90 for now. Probably don't need to move that. So yeah, we'll be able to, let's pull this over to 90 for now, because in our reference, we're almost dead on with them. We might be a little bit above them, but it's pretty close. So we'll come down and then we'll back out a bunch because we want all of this space over here to catch these reflections. So we're going to be mindful of that. Now let's bring it back up a little bit and tilt the camera down just like a tad to try to match this. Let's see. This is looking pretty dang close. I might tilt it down just a little bit more. And again, this is where your artistic tendencies can take over. I'm going to scale this up this direction just so that it's not ending, right before, because this will appear in the render if we do something like that. And speaking of appearing in the render, we can go ahead and render it just to see what that looks like. So you come up to render, hit render image. So this is kind of what our composition looks like right now, which is pretty bad. There's no lighting. Let me double check, make sure my recording is still recording. Okay, we're still recording. Good. Next step is going to be to get some lights in here because there's no lights. But before we do lighting, let's change our rendering engine from Eevee to Cycles. So Eevee is a real-time renderer. Cycles is not. So you'll get more realistic lighting out of Cycles. So once we do that, we'll be able to hit Shift A, bring in a light. Let's go ahead and do the spotlight, which is that top one that's casting this round light that we were talking about. So let's move this up above this and turn on our scene so we can kind of see what we're looking at. It's still super dark. So under this spotlight's properties, we can come in here and crank this, up a lot to whatever we need to see. And the important things to note about a spotlight is this radius and the blend mode, or the blend degree here. It's going to be like how feathered it is or how smoothly it blends in. Because if we keep it at 0, it's just a very sharp line. But in the render on the left, it kind of just perfectly fades out. So we're going to crank that all the way to the top, right? But it also got smaller when we did that. So we're going to increase the radius a little bit to make it match what we're looking at. So let's keep this at, might have to play around. Let's call it 3, see what that looks like. And we can crank this way up to really see what we're working with. So that looks pretty close to what we need. You might be able to scale this light a little bit. I'm losing where the front is. Let's see. So I'm noticing that around these guys, it doesn't look like a perfect circle. It looks elliptical like this. So if we do that, I just hit scale on my keyboard S, something that matches our characters a little bit better. All right, going back to the camera view, this looks about right to me. Let's go back up to the top view. Okay, that seems good. Let's go ahead and pull in these two other lights on the left and the right. Just get some more stuff going on in the scene. So these will use area lights. And I'm just going to put one off to either side, right? Just moving around, rotating it until it goes through our people here. And we'll adjust these as we need to. So I'm going to copy that one with Shift D and move it over to the other side, rotate it again, and just kind of, you see, I'm just kind of crossing through this scene. So this is the basics of our lighting setup. And if we go into this mode, it doesn't really look like much because our materials are pretty simple. So let's add some reflective materials, make these look gold, and then we can see what we're really working with. So to do that, we'll go over to the shading tab and we'll switch over to the rendered mode, which I'm doing that by pressing Z on my keyboard. But you can also click this up here. And then I'm just gonna go to the camera and click on one of our materials here and click new. And this is gonna give us a node that we can use to adjust the material. So we want this to be a gold material. Let's open up our reference again down here so we have something to see. It's taking a second to load in. Okay, so let's try to get close to a gold material. So gold looks kind of like this, maybe a little warmer. And the metallic, we're gonna crank it all the way up because it's metal. And then for the roughness, we're gonna lower this down, maybe to like a 0.25. And you can see it's definitely looking gold. We're gonna need to pump some more light in here because it's pretty dark, but we're definitely getting there. So one other thing on the material is the index of refraction here. Let's move this to 0.470 because we're kind of going for, I don't know, it's stylized, but that looks like gold to me. And there's real numbers for this that you can find. So the IR of gold is like this. Everything's got its own. Anyways, might be a little extra for what we're doing here. But now that we've got this material, let's call it gold. And let's select everything else that we want to be gold, and then select the thing we just made gold and hit Command L and link the materials together. That's just a quick way to do that. And now we want to change this floor to give us these reflections that we're looking for. So we're gonna hit new. Let's go ahead and call this floor so we don't get distracted. And the floor is like a dark gray color. If you go too dark, you might lose all of your light's reflections. So we're gonna keep it like a dark gray value. We're gonna make it metallic because it looks not too different from what's going on with other things. And then we're gonna bring down the roughness a little bit because we want these reflections here. But you can see we're not getting a whole lot of light, so we're gonna have to go back and crank up our lighting. But before we do that, let's fix this gray background here because if that'll just show up in our render like that. So to fix that, we'll go to Object and we'll go to World. And then where this is the gray value, we'll make that black. And now, wow, that looks very dramatic. And then we'll switch back to the object we're editing. Okay, so obviously not enough light in this scene because you can't hardly see anything. It's kind of moody, kind of cool. And it might be hard to see where your things are here, your lights, but you can find them over here in the outliner if you need to. It's an area light. Let's bring this up and give this like 1,000 for value. Just kind of random here. There's probably better science behind this stuff. But let's make this big. And this light, this top one should be a gold color, kind of to match the rest. You can see it in the reflection that it's a more yellow color than the rest of it. So we'll make that more yellow, maybe darken it just a little bit. And we've definitely got more light, but you can see our floor isn't quite doing what we want it to. So let's adjust its value some by coming over into the material and then maybe adjusting how metallic this floor really is or how rough it is. Like the rougher it is, the more reflections you're going to get, where if it's like totally glossy, you're going to get, these will appear pretty sharp, but we might lose that area light. So we want to find some type of middle ground here. where we're still getting that light. Let's see. And sometimes you just got to play around with this stuff for a while. Let's make it darker. These area lights are showing up a little bit too much, so we're going to make them bigger and further away, because I don't want it to directly bounce off of the floor. So I'm going to kind of like rotate it like this. And then let me just do this manually. How big did I make this one? That's a random number. Let's make this 10 just for fun. 10, and again, we're going to move it further away and just rotate it so it's going through. And let's see what this is looking like. So this is looking pretty close to our reference here, but the colors are not quite there. So let's come back into here and lighten these up. Let's see. I don't know if you can hear people yelling outside, but some stuff going on out there. Is it looking gold? Maybe a little rougher. Get some more of it. And this is, like I said, I keep saying this, but it really is up to your own taste. These are just kind of the methods for getting close to what we need. And you'll be able to change a lot with this light here. You know, like if we made this green, for example, changes the whole vibe, huh? But we're going for that luxurious Robinhood card gold. So let's see, that looks pretty close to me. So I think we should give this a render and see what it looks like and see if there's anything we can improve or if it's good enough. I might make this a little more reflective because I'm forgetting how important these casts are to the final thing. I can just tweak this forever, I think. Okay, I'm going to render this and then I'll come back. You don't have to watch the wait for this with me. Okay, so this is our final result on the right, and this is our original reference on the left. I think they ended up looking pretty similar, but there are definitely a handful of things that we didn't quite nail. One of them is the reflection on the ground. This material could be tweaked further to get more of this color, and also the complete shadow. I even mentioned at the beginning, like the depth kind of needed, but you know, you can just adjust that with the camera. There's ways in your output you can adjust this number here. And this render is 1920 by 1080. I switched it to 1080 by 1080, and now it looks more like this in the viewport. So you can see it catching all of that shadow, which is more what you want. But overall, it came out pretty close, and I think the spirit of it's there. And hopefully, you can take these techniques and make your own illustrations that look like this. Because I admire the Robinhood design a lot, and hopefully, we'll see more of this stuff.